This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there are two alerts among news watchers each year as June approaches. One of that, the hurricane season is about to begin, and the other is that the legislative session is about to end. Well, happily, the tropics give us little to talk about, but the closing days of lawmaking can always be stormy. There was thunder earlier this week as a New Orleans City Council member discussed his plans to temporarily ease regulation of the French Quarter. Those plans are now changing. Murders continued with the added tragedy of so many seeming to be targeting women, often young mothers. We'll look at these stories tonight, as well as new developments in the ongoing First NBC legal proceedings, plus another proposal to move City Hall and the death of Ed Muniz, a former mayor of Kenner and one of Carnival's pivotal figures. Joining us tonight are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Missy Wilkinson, staff writer of the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate, Greg LaRose, editor of the Louisiana Illuminator, and Tony McCauley, staff writer at the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Tony, we're going to stay with you because this week, the councilperson for the French Quarter, Freddie King, had a proposal that really, to say the least, ruffled some feathers. A lot of feather ruffling going on with that. But he sort of changed his stance. Background us on this.
Yeah, hands off my French Quarter. He put in an ordinance 2 weeks ago that would have suspended for a year code enforcement in the French Quarter. And it was done fairly quietly, but it pretty quickly leaked out, and there was an uproar amongst preservationists and a lot of folks, residents in the French Quarter. And they quickly called together an emergency town hall meeting, and Freddie King was invited, and he attended, and he was very humbled at the meeting, said he hadn't really understood about the French Quarter and the VCC and what it meant to everyone, and he sort of backtracked very quickly. But, you know, the question was, why do it in the first place? He's now said that he's not only going to delay it till later this month, or in June rather, but he's going to delay it until August, and he's going to rethink the whole thing to look at it more holistically, I think is the way he put it, more about getting permitting reformed for the whole city rather than just the French Quarter. But it was really, a head scratcher, and I think people are going to be kind of wondering for a while as to what was behind the move in the first place.
But in fairness to him, it is a fairly common complaint among business people and developers. They'll say, you can't do anything in the French Quarter. There's too many laws. There's too many rules. It's too hard.
Yeah, for sure. And the VCC was at this meeting, the head of it and the deputy head, and they agreed, they need to reform the permitting process, which goes beyond the VCC. That's safety and permits at City Hall in general. And businesses are always, saying things like that. And we've had Hard Rock Hotel show us why we need vigilance on that front. But I think both sides ended up agreeing at the meeting, the emergency City Hall, the emergency VCC meeting, that reform is needed, but just not a suspension of code enforcement for a year.
Well, it really did set off alarm bells for those who are concerned about keeping the French Quarter together. The tout ensemble, that's what it was all about when it was established in the 1930s, the Vieux-Carré Commission. So he said that he was really surprised by the blowback, which sort of surprised me, quite frankly, that he would be surprised.
Yeah. He said he was learning a lot. He's a former defense attorney who's voted into the city council, I think about 18 months ago in the last intake. So perhaps he wasn't all that familiar with, the reaction that people have to change down there. But there's a broader issue down there. I think you were aware that there's new businesses coming in, and they often, want things to happen a lot quicker than the French Quarter is used to making things happen. The old businesses there don't like to see change, and people, making a lot of these architectural changes, which the VCC is there to they have to approve a coat of paint change,
Right.
And the residents down there are very protective of it as a neighborhood.
Yeah.
They want it to remain a neighborhood, not just a tourist attraction.
Right. Well, like Errol pointed out, I mean, over the years, since the VCC has existed, there has been certainly disagreements, with both homeowners and businesses as to what the VCC would tell somebody to do, what they could do or not do. But still, there's a concern for keeping the French Quarter intact.
Yeah, I mean, what good might come out of this is that was reinforced, that is the situation, and you can't just go in and bulldoze through something like that to accommodate a few businesses. But also, maybe I think they would say on the other side that they're going to have a serious look now at the streamlining the process more broadly than the French Quarter, but also the French Quarter. And it also highlighted the fact that the VCC is like a lot of departments in the city, understaffed. They only have 4 to start with, and they only have 5 budgeted to start with, and they only have 4 in there. So, there may be some good that comes out of it.
So right now, though, the proposal's pulled, the one that he had initially
he's totally
made.
pulled, and when he's going to come back with something, it's going to be something different, broader, and aimed more at.
And it certainly has done a lot
streamlining.
to preserve the architectural integrity of the quarter. So without it, the quarter would probably be a disaster right now. So that's good. A few too many T-shirt shops that managed to get in, but it's been important.
Right. Well, the one business we do know that was behind it was the purveyor of huge ass beers. I always get that wrong. We don't know all the businesses behind the initiative, but it's the daiquiri shops and all that want the faster track on the rules.
Still, these businesses, they make the choice to go into the quarter. Nobody's forcing them to go into it. And they should be aware of the restrictions of making that choice. So, we'll see where it goes.
True.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tony. All right, E, over to you. City Hall might be moving, maybe, again?
Well, the whole complex, if you picture where City Hall is, along Loyola Avenue, all that was built like in the 1950s. Those were the post-war years. Shep Morris was mayor. And the move... America was feeling its oats at this time, okay? Like, hey, man, we won this war. We need to do modern and do new things, And as far as New Orleans, there's too much old stuff in New Orleans. The old City Hall was Greek Revival. And so this is supposed to be a concept of a modern civic center. And so they built the courthouses, they built the library, and they built the City Hall. I got to tell you, in all those years, nobody ever fell in love with that City Hall. It may have been a little bit too modern. It didn't really fit in with New Orleans. For a few years, they actually had the Mardi Gras parades go past that City Hall, and people said, no, that's not the same thing, and they brought them back to Gallier Hall. Every mayor, at least every recent mayor, has had a proposal to move City Hall. Well, one is say it's a bad building as far as the structural things. I know for a fact the elevators have always been like a major problem there. Mayor Cantrell had that proposal to put it in the auditorium, and remember that got some blowback. Mitch Landrieu had a proposal to put it in Charity Hospital. Ray Nagin had a proposal to put it in one of the downtown business districts. I remember one councilman once had a proposal to put it in the Tremé area, thinking with all those proposals that if you put it somewhere else, you can bring business to that area, but at the same time, you got this very valuable land where City Hall is now, and Poydras, and that city can make a lot of money off of selling or renting that land. But it's never really happened. There's a lot of legalities to doing this. There's a lot of talking back and forth before the state and the city whose land it is. It's a long way from happening. And a lot of debate, basically, it would require building a new City Hall.
Right. A new building would be needed. It would just move across the street into the Duncan Plaza area.
Duncan Plaza, there's a lot of great ideas there that never quite worked out, that people thought they would, Duncan Plaza was supposed to be like Central Park, it's not. It's mostly empty park. There's not a lot that goes on there. It's a lot of the development there. If you look at the back, like where New Orleans Center was. You know, that's supposed to be a modern shopping area. That never happened. It never developed. It couldn't compete with the suburban shopping centers. And so, you know, the Benson Towers, you know, the office building, the whole office building scene is changing right now. So there's a lot of rethinking about modern development going on.
Right. So the talks are just starting here, and regarding land swaps between the city and state. So
yeah, the talks are just starting.
Okay, all righty. Thanks a lot, E. All right, Missy, but let's go on over to you, because really, you know, very, very concerning situation now where we've seen several women being shot to death in the city of New Orleans in a short span of time.
Yes, it's a really very disturbing, gruesome month for women. It's especially painful given that it's Mother's Day and so many children now are without their mothers. Between April 20th and May 20th, 6 women, all of them between the ages of 20 and 44, all of them Black women, 5 of them with children were murdered. 2 of those women were murdered with their children in the car with them. It's just been a really disturbing, deeply disturbing month, no matter how you slice it. It's not unprecedented. We have seen 6 women killed in a month before. The last time was in 2015, so it's not common, but it's also not unprecedented. The most women we've ever seen murdered in a month was in 1994, which was a banner year for murders. 9 women were murdered in a month that year. So far, there's only been 1 arrest made in one of the cases. One of those homicides was a double homicide. Other than that, they're still open under active investigation, and for that reason, police have been a little tight-lipped about them.
And so the one where the arrest has been made, it seems to be a domestic violence issue. With the other ones, as you said, the police really haven't talked about it that much. But, I mean, what seems to be the thinking out there? Are these just random shootings where perhaps there's gunfire going on and these women are getting in the way of it? Or were these women perhaps targeted for some reason?
You know, I think that it's possible that all of those things are going on because we are looking at 6 different cases. It's very unclear as to whether women were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, if they were targeted because of their connection to another individual, or as our mayor insinuated in a comment that she later apologized for, if they were themselves involved in criminal activity and sort of incurred retribution this way. I do know from my reporting that in at least one of these homicides, sources told me that they did not believe it was an accident. It's hard to accidentally pump 6 bullets into a car and target a woman. They said that due to the timing and other factors, they just basically didn't think that it was an accident.
Is this possibly, because I've heard this put out there also, just sort of warnings that for some reason, you know, the group or whomever out there is warning another individual or group and targeting a family member or some close associate or a friend. Is this possible?
That is something that I'm hearing from my sources as well, who are close to these victims. It is also something that police will not confirm with me. They don't want to speculate as to what any of the nature, the motive could be at this point, or at least not publicly. But I am hearing reports that in some cases, people may retaliate against loved ones of people that they're beefing with. If they can't get to that individual, they will get to the person that is close to them.
And as you mentioned, I mean, some of these shootings, it's women who have been with their children, with their babies in the car.
Yeah, in 2 of those cases, women had their babies in the car with them. And one of the most recent ones that just happened on Saturday, it was a woman that was in the car with her 6-month-old baby. Her name was Nisha Anderson. People initially thought her baby had been grazed. Police reported it as a graze wound, but actually he was covered in her blood. Oh my gosh,
this is just, you know, the murder situation anywhere is just so heartbreaking and so worrisome. But this is really, how many again? 6?
6 women between April 20th and May 20th were murdered.
In 1 month. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. We hope that this stops.
Yes.
All right, thanks a lot, Missy. All righty, Greg, let's go on over to you. You've been covering the legislature, and okay, we're kind of working our way now to the end of the session. June 8th, right, is the end of the session?
Correct.
Some big things have happened, though, important issues. So let's sort of recap them. LGBTQ first.
Yeah, a pretty head-turning vote in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee Wednesday when a lawmaker, Gabe Ferment from up in Pollock, had proposed a bill to ban gender-affirming health care for transgender youth. And we've seen other states push toward this, conservative states, and get those bans enacted. But it all came down to a committee vote with the chairman, Senator Fred Mills from Parks near New Iberia, having the deciding vote. And he ultimately, reasoning that these decisions are best made between a doctor and a patient, voted against the ban. And what ensued for him, or what's ensuing for him, is a lot of blowback, negative blowback from fellow members of the GOP, critics that have just, really wanted to see this ban put in place. And what's unfolding now in the legislature, or it hasn't unfolded, it's been suggested. The Louisiana GOP put out a statement Thursday saying that essentially the bill, the ferment bill, needs to essentially be shot out of that committee and brought to the Senate floor. Another option would be for the language of the bill to be tacked on as an amendment to a House bill. So it's yet to unfold.
So the committee decision could be bypassed and just a bill could just jump on over to
There
the
is
floor?
a procedure to do that. It's very seldom used. In this instance, you have a Republican-dominated Senate and House, maybe a more moderate Senate. So I'm not sure that they would go to that radical of an approach to bring that bill out. But I think this is the state Republican Party trying to see if it can flex a little muscle and get this through.
So this would be for gender-affirming treatment for minors, but generally we're talking about for minors, hormone treatment?
Exactly.
It's not usually surgical. Pediatricians do not generally side with going to a surgical
There were some
intervention.
figures mentioned in the committee among Medicaid patients, because Medicaid can cover some of these gender-affirming treatments, that I want to say was between 2017 and 2021 that there were no surgical treatments of gender-affirming care in Louisiana. And as you point out, that this is very seldom recommended by physicians for minors who are transitioning. But yeah, it covers reversible treatments like hormones, puberty blockers, but not just for transgender youth, but for cisgender youth, cisgender people who might be, for whatever reason, having some sort of chemical imbalance or what have you, that need this care. Ferment's bill would have blocked them from receiving medical treatment as well.
So it may be on the floor for us to hear more about
A
that.
long shot, but we're not ruling it out.
Something else, death penalty.
Death penalty, sure. And I think most notable in recent months, Governor John Bel Edwards had been pressed to basically take a stance on this and came out as wanting to do away with it. So there's a bill from Kyle Green, a representative from Marrero, that would have pulled it away. If you go back to, let's say 20 plus years, the last person who was involuntarily executed was in 2022. In 2010, an inmate, Gerald Worlon, waived his right to appeal and voluntarily was executed. And those are the two most recent people who were put to death in Louisiana. The public defender says that annually the state spends in excess of $7 million to defend death penalty cases. Those are all basically hung up in the states that administer it, most of them anyway. Louisiana, of course, being the case where they just can't obtain the lethal injection drugs to administer the death penalty.
One other issue, parental rights.
Parental rights, this is a big one in that you have a lawmaker from Schriever who is putting forward the idea that parental rights should be enshrined in the Louisiana Constitution. And that in of itself, it basically says that the parent basically has the utmost foremost right when it comes to raising a child. Seems pretty innocuous, but what we're seeing in other states is that there's a real effort to put parental rights either in law. Louisiana would be the first to put it in its constitution, so that when you have matters like folks who are challenging library content or public school curriculum, they could point to that law or to that constitutional phrase and say that we get to decide, not a school district, not a library board.
And how would that impact child in need of care issues, where there's maybe a child abuse situation?
People I've talked to have said very negatively, whether it's someone trying to remove a child from an abusive environment, it could muddy up custody battles where essentially one person that has all the money and can press a court to rule in their favor because they can essentially prevail in a legal argument over parental rights. And it doesn't seem as though that the author, Beryl Amity of Schriever, has incorporated that. Her bill is sort of, it advanced to the House floor, but hasn't been brought up for a vote yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Greg. Tony, over to you. Latest developments in the FNBC case.
Well, the trial ended in February with 46 guilty counts for the former CEO, Ashton Ryan. He's got an appeal to see if he can get a new trial in July, but if that fails, he'd get sentenced in August, and then the other 9 guilty pleas will follow on from that. It's been going on since it collapsed in 2017.
The bank we're talking about, too.
The bank collapsed. It's the biggest in Louisiana history, the biggest bank collapse, and it was the biggest in the U.S. after the financial crisis until the recent banks that we've had collapsing. But we just did a story which kind of shows that even though it's 6 years ago, the fallout for some of the people and businesses in the city was pretty widespread. There was about $1 billion of bad debt that they didn't sell off to Hancock and Whitney after the collapse, and that was sold to so-called vulture funds, the kind of sort of hedge funds that specialize in buying that debt for pennies on the dollar and then chasing people for their assets, basically, to collect on it. And the story we just did was about a lawyer who got suspended by the Supreme Court for trying to stave off the bankruptcy of his client a little bit too vigorously. He accused Judge Schlegel in the 24th District Court in Metairie of corruption, and the law firm that was representing the vulture funds of a fraudulent scheme and so on, incorrectly, according to the Supreme Court. But he's been, the widow, his former partner's widow, had lost $15 million estate that had been left her by her husband, and she died in December at 79, and the lawyer question is 79 as well. So, it's just there were a lot of businesses that actually went bankrupt because of that. Lost a lot of assets.
So a lot of people touched by this. And now you say Ashton Ryan, he's not been sentenced yet, right?
No, he's
convicted of how many
74
counts?
now,
Okay.
and he faces 46 counts with up to 30 years each. So it's potentially a life sentence, depending on what the judge decides.
And the counts were on what exactly was he convicted on?
Most of them were bank fraud. It was basically that he colluded with these other people who pleaded guilty to keep lending them money to cover up the fact that they were all broke, basically.
Yeah. Okay, all righty, Tony, thanks a lot. E, over to you. We lost this week someone who really has had a tremendous impact on Carnival.
Yeah, I have a couple of clips to show. One is that when he was a young man, he wanted to have a parade. He loved parades. And so he wanted to have a parade in Gentilly on that Saturday night before Mardi Gras, because there wasn't a parade at that time on Saturday night. So here he is. He's talking about he was called Endymion because he lived in Gentilly near the fairgrounds. There was a horse named Endymion, so he decided that didn't have any floats, and so he found out that the crew of Carrollton had floats that they'd be willing to rent. So here he is talking about the captain of the crew of Carrollton.
And we're talking about Ed Muniz, of course.
Adonis paraded from 54 to 64. And I told Peggy on the way back to D.C. Boulevard, I said, it's a shame that they don't have a parade on a big Saturday before Mardi Gras. And we put together like 140 people to ride in the First Endymion parade. I had found out that Adonis would rent their floats rather from Carrollton, crew of Carrollton. So I found out who the captain of Carrollton was, John Ackerman. So I called him on the phone one day and said, "Because we understand you used to rent to Adonis." Now I didn't tell him that I was the only member at the time, see? But he invited me out, and I took 3 or 4 people with me, and he charged us $5,000 to rent the whole parade. But so we got, as the year went on, we got about 140 people. And we paraded for the first time on February the 4th of 1967.
Okay.
Okay. So the First Endymion parade, 140 people, cost $5,000. The second is a couple of years later when he's talking to Blaine Kern. And at the time, Bacchus's and happening, and Bacchus is a big sensation. And Blaine Kern's trying to interest somebody in doing another Bacchus. And so he talks to Muniz about this.
Blaine said to me, "Have you ever been to Bacchus?" And I said, "No, because I go to Venus on that night. I go to the Venus ball." He said, "Well, this year, why don't you come to Bacchus?" And, I mean, that was big time. When you had Bob Hope coming to be king of a parade, that was big time. So I told Blaine, I said, "This is wonderful." And he said, "Well, you know what?" He said, "I think your club could do the same thing." And he said, I'm so confident that y'all can do it." He says, "I'm going to offer to bill you, whatever it was, 14 floats, like Bacchus. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul, you know, the contract will tear it up." So here again, Endymion was never made up in the early days of affluent people. I mean, it was regular people, middle class, so on.
Anyway, the combination of Blaine Kern and Ed Muniz together is like bringing together P.T. Barnum to get in the same place. I mean, they were both those kind of guys with big ideas and a lot of push. But anyway, and so, yeah, it was Bacchus that influenced Endymion.
Right.
And the guy who gets a lot of credit is Pip Brennan, who started Bacchus. And then, of course, overseeing it, both of them was Blaine Kern, just making him happen.
Oh, you know, I just heard Muniz said, if it didn't work. I think it worked.
Yeah.
And Endymion is just really enormously big and a wonderful, beautiful parade. And certainly our condolences to the Muniz family. He was such an important man to his family and to this community. Of course, former Kenner mayor, too. And also served on the Jefferson Parish Council. So
Yeah.
Big time
Yeah.
radio pioneer in the.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. They had
That's
radio
right.
stations, too.
Yeah, he just touched so much, so many of us. All righty, guys, other stories.
Okay, well, speaking of Ed Muniz, at his funeral procession, a very touching part, it passed by Delgado because they recently put up a statue of him because it's along there where the Endymion Parade forms on the day before. I think it's a beautiful statue. It's him, and he's holding the little man who's like the symbol of the Endymion Parade. And so they're standing together, and so it's right along that site. I think it's a nice touch.
That really is nice. Okay, Missy, over to you.
So on not so nice news, except for our local prosecutors in the Linda Frickey carjacking and dismemberment and murder case, they were dealt a win in court on Thursday when a judge ruled that expert testimony regarding juvenile brain development would be limited in the trial. The judge also deemed one of the 4 co-defendants fit to stand trial. She's a 16-year-old girl. She had previously been found to have very limited understanding of what the process in criminal court entails. She's been brought up to speed, and she's also on some new medications for her mental health issues, which include PTSD and depression and anxiety. And so the trial is moving forward. It is scheduled for June 2024. Family members were present in court on Thursday, and they were happy with the outcome.
Greg, over to you.
It's a budget battle in the waning days of the session, with senators and Governor John Bel Edwards wanting to break through a constitutional cap on spending to give teachers a $2,000 pay raise. On the other side are House lawmakers who pulled that raise out of the current form of the budget and feel that money should be spent on retiring public employee and teacher retirement system debt.
Okay, so they continue to battle that.
Indeed.
All righty. Tony.
For people following the Port of South Louisiana's nearly $500 million offer to buy Avondale, that's all gone quiet. That was announced in January. It was supposed to be finished in June, but they've had to postpone it because a lot of people questioned the price of that deal. So we're waiting on a big report to come in from consultants who will either say that price was right, which, as I say, a lot of people thought it was way too much, or that it might get done at a much lower price, or might not get done at all.
All right. Well, we shall see. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.